When we see news about major wars around the world, we can easily notice that they almost always happen far away from South America.
This is a Fox News alert. News from the President of the United States that there has been an attack inside Iran.
But if we look at cases of homicide or public insecurity, the picture can be very different. Today, we invite you to find out whether it is possible to describe South America as one of the most peaceful and, at the same time, one of the most violent regions in the world. The last few years have certainly not been the calmest when it comes to international security. When we think about war, many conflicts may come to mind, from Russia and Ukraine to the Middle East or India and Pakistan, not to mention the ongoing tension on the Korean Peninsula. However, there is one region that has remained almost completely isolated from these major military confrontations: South America. Wars have not been fought there for a very long time. Territorial disputes between countries are rare, and the possibility of an armed conflict with a neighboring nation is generally not among the public's main concerns. But is this really true? To begin with, the countries of South America gained their independence during the 19th century and went through a period of national consolidation in which several territorial disputes took place. However, from the 20th century onward, wars became the exception rather than the rule. The three most significant conflicts were the Chaco War between Paraguay and Bolivia from 1932 to 1935, the Falklands War between Argentina and the United Kingdom, the Cenepa War between Ecuador and Peru in 1995. Now consider what happened elsewhere during the same period. Europe experienced both world wars, the Balkan Wars, and the ongoing war between Russia and Ukraine. The number of deaths on that continent has reached into the millions, while in South America, they have been counted in the thousands. But this is not the only way to look at the issue. Let's examine which countries currently possess nuclear weapons. There are 9: Russia, the United States, China, France, the United Kingdom, India, Pakistan, Israel, and North Korea. Iran could eventually join that list, but for now, these are the only nuclear-armed states. Not one of them is located in South America. Moreover, there is not even a serious expectation that any South American country intends to develop nuclear weapons. This is consistent with another important indicator: military spending. Among the 40 countries that allocate the largest share of their GDP to defense, only one is South American, Colombia. Even then, this is largely due to internal security concerns, rather than the possibility of military conflict with neighboring countries. In fact, Colombia is the only country in the region whose military spending exceeds the global average. Worldwide, countries spend about 2.4% of their GDP on defense. In contrast, the South American average is only 1.3%. At the same time, we can observe that although several disputes have occurred, they never escalated into full-scale wars and were instead resolved through diplomatic means. One example is the maritime boundary dispute between Peru and Chile, which was settled by the International Court of Justice in 2014. Another example is the Beagle Channel dispute. Several decades ago, Argentina and Chile came extremely close to going to war, but in 1978, they ultimately agreed to resolve the conflict through papal mediation. We can even measure this by looking at the number of people killed in interstate conflicts over the last 4 decades. According to the Uppsala Conflict Data Program, approximately 330,000 people have died worldwide in such conflicts. In South America, however, the total reaches only about 1,000, most of them Peruvians and Ecuadorians, who lost their lives during the Cenepa conflict around 30 years ago. At this point, it becomes clear that interstate conflicts are indeed rare in South America. Wars between countries have been few, governments spend relatively little on defense, and disputes have generally been resolved through diplomacy rather than armed conflict. So does that make South America the most peaceful region in the world? From this perspective, one could certainly argue that it does. However, this reality coexists with another very unusual phenomenon. This region is also one of the most violent in the world, not because of armies or bombings, but because of crime and homicide. And there is plenty of data to support this claim. For example, let's look at the rate of intentional homicides relative to the population. According to the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, UNODC, the global average is 5.2 murders per 100,000 people per year. In South America, that figure rises to 14.1, nearly 3 times the global average. Ecuador stands out in particular, recording 46 homicides per 100,000 inhabitants, making it the second highest homicide rate in the world, surpassed only by Jamaica. Only 2 countries in the region, Bolivia and Argentina, have homicide rates below the global average. Another way to understand the situation is that 19% of all murders worldwide occur in South America, even though the region is home to only about 5% of the world's population. Furthermore, according to the UNODC, half of all homicides in the Americas are linked to organized crime, while the global average is only 24%. When trying to explain why homicides occur around the world, the United Nations identifies several contributing factors. One is the proportion of young people in the population, since they are more likely to become victims. Another is the level of economic development. Generally speaking, countries with higher GDP per capita tend to have lower homicide rates. The percentage of the population living in urban areas also plays a role, as many cities have developed effective strategies to combat crime. Another important factor is income inequality. The more unevenly wealth is distributed, the greater the likelihood of homicide. Finally, there is gender inequality. The smaller the gender gap, the lower the level of gender-based violence tends to be. However, these are broad global patterns and do not apply equally to every region. In the Americas, for example, violence is both committed and suffered primarily by young men. In fact, the homicide rate among this group in Latin America is 4 times higher than the global average. But perhaps the factor that best explains the region's violence is economic inequality. In other words, societies where income is distributed more unevenly tend to experience higher levels of homicide. This relationship can be observed through the Gini Index, which measures income inequality. Countries such as Colombia and Brazil, which are among the most violent, also rank among the 10 most unequal countries. In fact, every South American nation has a Gini Index that places it among the 60 worst-performing countries in the world for income inequality. Violence in the region is not reflected only in homicide rates. It is also evident in robberies and public insecurity. Reliable crime statistics are difficult to obtain because many robberies are never reported. In addition, legal definitions vary from one country to another, making estimates and comparisons more complicated. Nevertheless, using the same UN source, we can compare the number of reported robberies per 100,000 inhabitants. Among the 15 countries with the highest reported robbery rates, 8 are in South America. In many cases, however, feelings of insecurity are more subjective than something that can be easily measured or compared. For that reason, the results of the World Values Survey are also useful. According to the survey, 20% of the world's population says they do not feel safe. In Latin America, that figure climbs to 51%. So yes, South America possesses a unique dual character. It is a peaceful region because wars between countries are extremely rare. Yet it is also a violent region internally, where crime, homicide, and insecurity remain major challenges. According to some scholars, one possible explanation is that these countries have had so many domestic issues to resolve and have found it so difficult to consolidate strong states that they have had little capacity or incentive to fight one another. In a world that remains deeply troubled by international conflicts, do you think South America will continue to avoid wars?